Her husband of 13 years woke up and asked for a divorce after she birthed 6 children. Just like that. No warning. No fight. Just done. Until she beat him to it. Before we jump right back in, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, please subscribe and like for more interesting stories. Sonia met Richard in their early 20s. They were both in their final year at the University of Texas. He was charming and driven, majoring in business and already dreaming about the real estate empire he wanted to build. She was soft-spoken and full of quiet wisdom, studying education and already writing lesson plans in her head. Their paths crossed in the university library one late evening. Sonia had fallen asleep at her desk with her books scattered in front of her. Richard, in search of a charger, noticed her, smiled at the drool forming at the edge of her lips, and tapped her gently. "Hey, you okay?" She sat up quickly, embarrassed. "Oh yeah, just tired." "You drool when you sleep," he said, grinning. She blushed, then laughed. That was their first conversation. It didn't take long for it to become a daily thing. Study breaks turned into coffee dates. Long walks across campus turned into deep conversations about life, dreams, and childhoods. Richard had lost his father young. Sonia grew up with a single mother. In each other, they found someone who understood struggle, who wasn't afraid of responsibility, who wanted more than what the world had handed them. After graduation, they moved in together in a small apartment in Dallas. Richard started working with a local real estate firm. Sonia landed a job as a high school teacher. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. They shared bills, made weekly grocery runs together, and laughed over frozen dinners. Every Friday night, they played old R&B tracks and slow danced barefoot in the living room. A year later, Richard proposed with a small diamond ring and a simple question. "Let's build something real, Sonia. Just us." She said yes, tears in her eyes. They planned a modest wedding. No designer dresses, no 5-tier cake, just family, close friends, and a backyard strung with borrowed fairy lights. Sonia wore her mother's veil. Richard wore a plain black suit. The pastor said something about patience, about sacrifice, about weathering storms. They moved to Texas after the wedding, into a rented townhouse not far from the school where Sonia taught. 3 months later, she found out she was pregnant. She took the test in the early morning before sunrise. Richard was still asleep. The second line appeared quickly, bold and undeniable. She stared at it for a long time, her hands trembling. When Richard woke up and saw her sitting on the bathroom floor with the test in her lap, he rubbed his eyes, leaned against the doorframe, and asked, "Is that what I think it is?" Sonia nodded, a nervous smile forming on her face. "Yeah." He walked over and pulled her into a hug. "We're really doing this." Pregnancy came with changes. Sonia was always tired, always hungry, always worried about whether she was doing things right. She still went to work, still taught her students with kindness and patience, but her body ached, and some nights she cried without knowing why. Richard was supportive at first. He ran to the store at odd hours for pickles and ice cream. He helped put together the crib they bought secondhand. He held her hair when morning sickness got too rough. They went to doctor's appointments together and picked names from a long list of baby books. When their first son, Daniel, was born, Sonia thought her heart would burst. She held him against her chest, stared at his tiny face, and whispered, "I'm your mommy." The first few months were a blur. Daniel didn't sleep much. Sonia returned to work after her short maternity leave because the bills couldn't wait. She dropped Daniel off at daycare each morning, then stood in front of her students with a brave face and tired eyes. At night, she fed him, rocked him, soothed him back to sleep. Richard worked late often. He said he was chasing bigger clients. Sonia didn't complain. She believed in him. She believed in their dream. 2 years later, they had their second child, then the third. Sonia never stopped working. She would give birth, rest for a few weeks, and go right back to the classroom. She was a teacher by day, a mother day and night, and a wife whenever she had a spare moment to breathe. The fourth baby came, then the fifth. That one was a girl. Sonia cried happy tears when the doctor told her. "A daughter," she whispered. Finally, by the time she had their sixth child, another boy, Sonia had become a master of routines. She could cook dinner with one hand while rocking a baby with the other. She could pack 6 lunches in under 15 minutes. She could mark essays, wash uniforms, soothe nightmares, and still smile through parent-teacher meetings. But the glow that once surrounded their marriage had faded. Richard still worked. He had moved up the ladder, now managing more clients, closing bigger deals. But he came home later. He rarely joined the family at the dinner table. He never woke up with the babies, never helped with homework, never noticed when Sonia was sick or when her eyes were red from crying. He believed that paying the bills was enough. Sonia, on the other hand, did everything else. She woke up before the sun every single morning. Her alarm rang at 4:45 a.m., and by 5 a.m., she was already in the kitchen, barefoot, hair tied up in a loose bun, preparing breakfast. The smell of eggs and toast filled the air as she packed 6 lunchboxes, each labeled with a name and customized for each child's preferences. No peanut butter for Daniel, extra grapes for Jaden, and a note for her daughter, Amara, who was prone to feeling anxious at school. By 6 a.m., the house came alive. Tiny footsteps padded through the hallway. Doors opened and slammed. Cries of "Mom, where are my socks?" and "Mommy, he's using my toothbrush," echoed through the air like background music. Sonia moved like clockwork, calm, steady, focused. She dressed the younger ones, brushed hair, zipped jackets, signed permission slips, and poured glasses of orange juice on autopilot. She didn't complain. Not once. She had made peace with her role. Richard, on the other hand, was still in bed. He usually got up around 7:30 a.m., showered, and left the house in a well-pressed shirt and polished shoes. Sonia didn't remember the last time he asked how the kids were doing in school, or if they had a cold, or needed new shoes. His job, in his mind, was outside the house. He paid the bills, and that was enough. The rest? That was her territory. He was a traditional man. That was what he called it. "I'm not like these new age men," he would say. "I provide. That's my job." Sonia had stopped hoping he'd change. At one time, she had imagined that after the kids grew a bit older, maybe he'd help more. Maybe they'd share the load. But now, with 6 children, full-time teaching, and a house that never stayed clean for more than an hour, Sonia had given up on that thought. She wasn't bitter. Not loudly, anyway. But something inside her was growing quiet. At work, her students adored her. She had a gentle voice and a firm presence. She encouraged her students to speak their minds, to write freely, to think bigger than their situations. Some of them didn't know she had 6 kids. Others couldn't believe it. "How do you manage all that?" One of the younger teachers asked her one day. Sonia smiled. "I just do." The truth was, she didn't know how she did it either. Her body was always tired. Her back hurt. Her legs ached. Her eyes burned from late-night grading. But she kept going. Because mothers do. Because wives do. Because that's what she believed being strong looked like. Evenings were another story entirely. After picking up the kids, she went straight into homework mode. She helped the older boys with their science projects, read storybooks to the younger ones, and double-checked everyone's bags for the next day. Dinner was a flurry of stirring pots, setting the table, and wiping spills. Richard often came in late, sometimes after the kids had already gone to bed. "Long day," he would say, loosening his tie and sinking into the couch. Sonia would nod, then return to the kitchen to wash the dishes. He never asked how her day was. He didn't know that their youngest had a fever last Tuesday or that Amara cried before school because someone had teased her hair. He didn't see the missed meals, the silent tears behind the bathroom door, the way her hands shook from exhaustion when she thought no one was looking. But Sonia saw everything. She carried everything. And nobody saw her. One evening, after dinner, she sat alone in the living room, folding laundry while the TV hummed in the background. Richard was out again. Some meeting, he said. The kids were asleep. Her hands moved over the clothes, shirts, socks, tiny underwear, school uniforms. Each item a reminder of how much she gave. She looked down at her own feet. Dry, cracked, neglected. She didn't remember the last time she bought anything for herself. No new clothes. No salon visits. Her nails were always bare. Her hair was pulled back daily in a bun because there was no time to do anything else. She didn't feel like a woman anymore. She felt like a worker, a machine, a giver. And still, she didn't complain. but a quiet ache was building. Not in her bones, but in her spirit. She missed being touched with care. She missed conversations that weren't about bills or schedules. She missed laughing. She missed herself. Sonia didn't want to admit it, but she was lonely. Deeply lonely. The kind of lonely that crept in during the loudest moments, birthday parties, PTA meetings, family dinners, and whispered, "You're doing this all by yourself." She loved her children. That was never the question. They were her light, her reason. But the marriage? The love she thought she'd signed up for? It had gone quiet. Cold. Distant. She didn't know when the shift happened. Maybe it wasn't one big moment. Maybe it was hundreds of small ones. Missed hugs, shrugged off questions, silent dinners, forgotten birthdays. And then, that morning came. The morning Richard sat across the bed, rubbed the back of his neck, and said the words that would rearrange her life. "I don't think I want to do this anymore." Sonia blinked slowly. She had just finished tying the youngest boy's shoes and was about to wake the others for school. Her mind was full of checklists. His words didn't make sense. "What?" she asked quietly. "I've been thinking about it for a while," he said. "I'm not happy, Sonia. I don't think I've been happy for a long time." Her hands froze on the laces. "I think I want a divorce." She sat back on her heels and looked at him. His face was calm. Too calm. He had rehearsed this. "I've made arrangements for child support," he added. "I'll move out by the end of the week." Sonia didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just looked at him and said, "Okay." Then she stood up, woke the kids, made breakfast, packed the bags, and drove them to school. Like it was any other day. But it wasn't. The next morning started like any other. Sonia woke early, dressed the children, packed lunches, and fed them breakfast. She moved through the house with quiet, deliberate purpose. There was no visible sign of what she was about to do. Richard didn't say much that morning. He had slept in the guest room again. He came out only after the children were already at the table, dressed, and ready for school. Sonia poured him a cup of coffee, set it beside his plate, and didn't say a word. He didn't either. Later, after dropping the kids off at school, Sonia came home to a quiet house. She walked through the room slowly. The baby toys, the laundry, the homework left on the counter, all reminders of everything she'd carried alone for 13 years. She packed lightly, just a few clothes, her Bible, her phone charger, and a small travel bag. She took her passport and that of kids too. That was important. She didn't leave a note. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed and typed a short message to Richard. "I've traveled. Picked the kids from school today." And then she left. At the airport, she ignored the buzzing phone. She didn't care what he thought. She didn't owe him an explanation. Not after everything. Not after carrying the family like a mule while he floated through life like a guest. She boarded her flight to Europe without a backward glance. Back home, Richard barely noticed the message at first. He saw the text but shrugged it off. "She's probably mad," he muttered, tossing his phone aside. He didn't even read the full message. It wasn't until the school called at 3:15 p.m. that panic set in. "Mr. Richard? We've been trying to reach your wife. The children are still here. Is someone coming to pick them up?" "What do you mean?" he asked, confused. "Isn't Sonia there?" "No, sir. We haven't heard from her all day." Richard's heart began to race. He hung up, grabbed his keys, and drove straight to the school. When he arrived, all 6 children were waiting in the office. The staff looked concerned. The children looked confused. "Daddy, where's Mommy?" Amara asked, her voice small and worried. I don't know," Richard replied, trying to stay calm. "Come on, let's go home." At the house, everything looked the same, except it felt empty. Hollow, like something important had been removed. He called her phone. No answer. He went through the bedroom, opened the closets. Most of her clothes were there, but her charger was gone. Her handbag, her small suitcase, the passports. She had really left. The youngest started crying first. Then the others followed. One threw a toy across the room. Another knocked over a cup of juice. The baby peed himself on the couch. Richard stood in the middle of the chaos, stunned. He had no idea what to do. That night, he barely slept. The baby cried off and on. Amara came into his room twice, asking if Mommy was back yet. He had no answer. By morning, Richard was angry. Not the quiet kind of anger. The loud, bitter kind. The kind that looked for someone to blame. And he chose Sonia. He tried to call her again, but still no answer. He called her sister. No reply. Her mother. Nothing. Every number connected to Sonia went straight to voicemail. He called his brother. She left. Just walked out like I don't exist. Who does that? Who leaves 6 kids behind like they're nothing? His brother tried to calm him. Maybe she just needed time, Rich. Maybe she reached her limit. She's irresponsible, Richard barked. Selfish. I should have known. He called a pastor from church. I've been abandoned, he said. She left me with 6 children. She's not even checking in. You all talk about her like she's an angel. Where is that angel now? He kept repeating it because he thought if he said enough, people would see it his way. He was angry, yes, but he was also overwhelmed. The next morning, Richard woke up on the couch. His shirt was still rumpled from the night before. He hadn't slept. The kids were cranky, confused, still asking about their mom. He made toast and scrambled eggs, but only 2 of them ate. The children were not coping well. The baby refused to eat. Amara cried every night, calling for her mother in her sleep. Daniel, the eldest, grew silent, too quiet. Richard didn't know how to comfort them. His attempts to cook often failed. He forgot to sign their school folders. He burned the rice. He yelled more than he should have. Once he slammed the door so hard the baby started to scream and wouldn't stop for 15 minutes. Laundry piled up. The dishes grew crusty in the sink. The house began to smell different, like exhaustion and confusion and too many unanswered questions. He was drowning. One afternoon, he locked himself in the bathroom and sat on the floor with his head in his hands. What did they eat again? He whispered to himself. How did she make it look so easy? There were Cheerios all over the hallway. Toothpaste smeared on the bathroom mirror. One child had cut their hair with kitchen scissors. Another had hidden under the bed, refusing to come out for hours. He couldn't take it anymore. That night, exhausted and broken, he opened Instagram. There she was, Sonia. Her hair was done. She wore sunglasses. Her skin glowed. She was on a boat, laughing with the breeze in her hair. Her nails were red. She looked rested. She looked radiant. She looked like a stranger. He stared at the screen, frozen. He hadn't seen her like that since college. Not since before the kids. Before the bills. Before he'd stopped noticing her altogether. Richard felt something in his chest crack open. All his words, the blaming, the shouting, the calls to everyone who would listen, none of them could change the truth. Sonia had left because he gave her nothing left to stay for. And now, sitting in the silence, surrounded by the weight of 6 crying children and his own heavy guilt, Richard finally began to see. She had been the center of everything. And without her, everything was falling apart. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It had always been full of movement, sound, and Sonia. Even when it was chaotic, it had her rhythm. Her warmth lingered in the kitchen, in the folded towels on the bed, in the lunch notes she slipped into the kids' bags. Now it felt hollow, like something important had been unplugged. Richard tried to hold it together, but nothing made sense. The kids asked about her every hour. He answered as best as he could. She's just away for a little while, he told them. But even they could tell it wasn't the truth. The youngest wet the bed 3 nights in a row. Amara stopped eating dinner. The boys started arguing more, fighting over little things. Their routines fell apart quickly without Sonia there to hold them together. Richard wasn't used to being the one to fix it. He didn't know where the school shoes were kept. He didn't know how to braid hair. He didn't know what snacks went into which lunchboxes. Everything felt too big, too much, too loud. He started staying up late at night, scrolling through Sonia's Instagram page. She had posted again, this time a picture of a sunset on a beach. No caption, just a view. But even that quiet post said something. She wasn't missing them. Or maybe she was, but she wasn't coming back. Not yet. Richard's emotions went in circles. First it was shock, then denial, then anger. He sat with his brother in the backyard one evening, both of them nursing beers. She just left me, Richard said for the 10th time. His brother looked at him, tired of repeating the same thing. You left her first. Maybe not physically, but you weren't there, Rich. Richard didn't reply. He couldn't argue it. He remembered Sonia's face the morning he asked for a divorce. How still she had been. How quiet. How she didn't yell or question or beg. She had just said, okay, like she had known it was coming. Like she had already let go long before he did. Now she was on a cruise, sipping cocktails while he struggled to pack school lunches. The irony was not lost on him. He tried calling her again. Still no response. He texted, "Please, come back. We can talk. I miss you. The kids need you. I need you." She didn't answer. Every day that passed, the weight of what he had done pressed harder on his chest. He had taken her for granted. He had treated her like an unpaid nanny, not a partner. He had stopped seeing her. And now that she was gone, all he could see was how much she had done. How she had held it all together while he played the part of the man who only paid the bills and still expected applause. Richard started waking up earlier. He made breakfast. He took the kids to school. He tried to braid Amara's hair once. It was a disaster, but she smiled anyway. He picked up groceries, folded laundry, and even attempted to make spaghetti. He burned the sauce, but he was trying. Late at night, he opened the Bible Sonia had left behind. He hadn't touched it in years. He started praying again, not just for her to come back, but for strength, for forgiveness, for change. He didn't know if she would ever return, but he was starting to understand why she left. And deep down, he knew if she ever did come back, it wouldn't be to the same version of him, because that man was the reason she had to go. 6 weeks passed. The days were slow, but the changes were steady. Richard was no longer the man who came home and dropped his bag on the floor expecting dinner. He had learned how to do ponytails, though they were far from perfect. He no longer called it babysitting when he spent time with his own children. He still burned food sometimes, and laundry days remained his enemy, but he was trying. The house had adjusted to a new rhythm, a quieter one, a more humble one. And then, one quiet Sunday afternoon, Sonia returned. She didn't knock. She had her key. The kids were watching a cartoon in the living room when the door opened. Amara saw her first. "Mommy." The rush was instant. All 6 children threw themselves at her. She dropped her bag and knelt to hold them. Tears ran freely. She kissed their cheeks and their foreheads and ran her fingers through their hair, whispering, I missed you," over and over. Richard stepped out of the kitchen, frozen. He stared at her, unsure if he was dreaming. Sonia looked different. Her skin glowed. Her posture was lighter. Her hair was done in soft curls. She wore a white blouse tucked into jeans, simple but elegant. She looked peaceful, whole, like a woman who had taken time to breathe. Richard swallowed hard. "Sonia." She stood slowly and looked at him. "Can we talk?" He nodded. They stepped into the backyard while the kids stayed inside. The breeze was soft, the sky clear. Sonia didn't sit. She stood with her arms crossed lightly, like she was holding herself. "I forgave you," she said. Richard blinked. "You did?" "Yes," she nodded. "A while ago. But I needed space to hear myself. To remember who I was before I became everyone's everything." He stayed quiet. "I birthed 6 children, Richard. I gave my body, my time, my dreams. I stretched myself thin for this family. And one morning, you looked me in the eye and asked for a divorce like I hadn't given you everything." He lowered his head. She continued, her voice calm. "In those 6 weeks, I found peace. I remembered what rest feels like, what joy feels like, what it's like to be seen, not just as a mother or a wife, but as Sonia." "I'm sorry," he said, voice low and shaky. "I really am." "I know you are," she replied. "But this isn't about anger anymore. It's about clarity." He looked at her, unsure of what was coming. "I want the divorce." His breath caught. "I'll visit the children. I'll be around. But I need to rebuild my life. Alone." "Sonia, please," he whispered. "Don't do this. I've changed. I'm still changing. I'll do better. I believe you," she said gently. "But I'm not going back to who I was. I can't. That woman is gone." Richard broke down. He sat on the garden bench and buried his face in his hands. She walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder, not out of romance, but out of respect. "This isn't revenge," she said. "It's healing." Inside, the kids were laughing at something on the screen. Outside, 2 people sat in the middle of a quiet goodbye. And just like that, the end had come. But in the silence, something else had begun too. Sonia was choosing herself. For the first time in a long time, she was not afraid. The house no longer belonged to her, but it still smelled like her. Sonia visited every weekend. She didn't stay long, just enough to see the kids, talk with them, hold them, and remind them she still loved them. They always ran to her when she walked through the door, their laughter filling the air as if no time had passed. She would hug them one by one, kissing their foreheads, brushing their hair back, checking their cheeks, and hands like a doctor who didn't trust the reports. Sometimes she brought snacks, other times storybooks or small puzzles. She no longer brought laundry detergent or grocery bags. She wasn't the housekeeper anymore. She was a visitor. Richard stayed in the background during these visits. He watched her from the kitchen doorway, unsure how to be near her now. Sonia didn't make it difficult. She spoke to him politely. She asked how the kids were doing in school, if anyone had been sick, if he needed anything specific for their routines. But her voice never softened beyond the surface. She had set her boundary, and she stood by it. After her visits, she returned to a small rented apartment not far from the edge of town. It had white walls, 2 bedrooms, and a wide window that let in the morning sun. She bought secondhand furniture and watered a potted plant she named Grace. It was quiet, peaceful, and hers. She slept better there. She could hear her own thoughts. On some mornings, she made tea and sat by the window with a notebook in her hand, scribbling words that had been buried in her for years. Thoughts, feelings, dreams. She was remembering who she was before her world became diapers and school schedules. The divorce came through quietly. No court fights, no arguments. Sonia didn't ask for much. She gave Richard full custody, at least for now. It wasn't because she didn't love her children. It was because she needed to build something strong inside herself again, something steady, before she could carry others. People judged her for that. Some called her selfish. Others called her cold. Even people who had never lifted a finger to help her before had plenty to say now. But Sonia didn't explain herself. She had done enough of that in her life. She was healing. Slowly. Carefully. Honestly. Richard, for his part, had stopped begging. He still hurt, but he understood now. Every time Sonia left the house after her visit, the air felt different. He watched her walk to her car with her head high, her shoulders relaxed, her face calm. He knew she was gone for good. The kids began to adjust. They looked forward to her visits. They asked fewer questions. They started to understand, in their own way, that mommy was still mommy, even if she didn't sleep in the room down the hall. She was not all the way healed. She still missed the sound of her children waking her up. She still ached when she passed their old family photos. But she also smiled more. She danced sometimes when no one was watching. She stood taller. And she had hope. That was something she hadn't had in years. Mornings were quiet now, but Sonia didn't mind. In fact, she had started to look forward to them. She no longer woke to a crying baby or a list of 100 things to do. There were no school bags to pack, no dishes to wash before dawn. Her alarm still rang early, but not out of pressure. She simply liked watching the sky turn from blue to gold through her bedroom window. With tea in hand and soft music playing from her little speaker, she sat by the window with her notebook. At first, the pages were full of short thoughts, memories, and names. Some days, she wrote about her children, what she missed about their morning chatter, and how Amara always used to leave her shoes in the hallway. Other days, she wrote about herself, her childhood, her dreams, her regrets. It wasn't always easy. Some mornings she cried, but most days she smiled. She had joined a small writing group at the local library. They met on Tuesday evenings. It was nothing fancy, just a few people sitting in a circle, sharing stories and writing prompts. The first time she spoke, her voice trembled. But they listened. They nodded. They encouraged. And for the first time in years, she felt seen for something other than what she could give. She was no longer rushing through her own life. On Sundays, she attended church again. Alone at first. She sat in the back row and let the music wash over her. It was strange, stepping into a building where people didn't know her story. But it felt good. Clean. New. One afternoon, after service, a woman named Clara approached her. They had talked once or twice at the writing group. Clara was older, maybe in her late 50s, with a warm smile and kind eyes. "I just wanted to say," Clara said gently, "I admire your strength." Sonia paused. "I don't feel strong most days." "That's how I know you are," Clara replied. They sat on the church steps that day and talked. About motherhood, marriage, loneliness, forgiveness. It was the start of something Sonia didn't realize she needed, a friendship that had nothing to do with history, obligation, or family. Just connection. At home, Sonia started cooking again, not out of duty, but for pleasure. She tried new recipes. She bought candles for her kitchen. She played jazz music while stirring soup. She even bought a small camera and started taking pictures of things that made her feel calm. She was rebuilding her world from scratch, piece by piece. Richard still sent her updates about the kids. She appreciated the photos, Jaden with a missing tooth, Amara in her dance costume, Daniel holding a school award. She responded with warm messages and voice notes. She missed them. Of course she did. But she also knew that returning too soon would only restart the cycle she had worked hard to break. She had to do this right, for herself and for them. It had been almost a year since Sonia left. 12 months of growth, of silence and rediscovery, of visiting her children on weekends and kissing their foreheads goodbye on Sunday evenings. 12 months of learning how to be her own person again. But something had started to shift. The visits that used to feel like enough began to feel too short. The goodbye hugs lingered longer. Her daughter had stopped waving at the door and instead began asking, "Why can't I come with you, Mommy?" The boys didn't say much, but their eyes said it for them. Sonia felt it in her chest, the quiet ache of motherhood tugging at her spirit. She didn't regret leaving. Not for a second. She knew she had needed that time. If she had stayed, she might have lost herself completely. But now, the thought of building a life that didn't include her children's daily laughter, their messes, their noise, it no longer felt complete. One Friday evening, after dropping off a bag of new clothes for the kids, she sat across from Richard in the kitchen. The kids were playing in the backyard, their voices echoing through the window. "Richard," she began gently, "I've been thinking." He looked up from his cup of coffee. "About what?" "About the kids. About bringing them to live with me." He didn't respond right away. He looked through the window, toward the yard, then back at her. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" he asked, not in a confrontational tone, but with genuine caution. "I'm not the same woman I was," she replied. "And I'm not trying to take them away from you. I want to be there for the day-to-day again. I want to wake them up in the morning, help with homework, tuck them in." Richard nodded slowly. He didn't argue. Maybe he had seen it coming. Maybe he had known all along that this would be temporary. "They'll love that," he said quietly. "They miss you. A lot." Sonia smiled softly, but there was a tear in her eye. "I miss them too." The transition wasn't immediate. It took time. Sonia spent weeks preparing her small apartment, turning the second bedroom into a shared space for the boys, and making space in her room for Amara. She bought bunk beds, extra blankets, a nightlight. The first night they stayed over, they couldn't sleep. "Mommy," one of the boys whispered, "is this our new house?" "It's our home," she said, "and you're safe here." They all piled in her bed that night. Sonia didn't mind. She lay in the middle, arms wrapped around whoever needed her most. She stared at the ceiling and smiled. She had found herself, and now she was ready to be their mother again. Not from exhaustion, not from sacrifice, but from love that was full and healed. If this story stirred something in you, anger, peace, quiet satisfaction, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice brings this space to life. Thank you for watching.